the last little section of the book of Deuteronomy, we're going to be focused entirely on on chapter 32, verses 1 through 7. So if you want to tee up Bibles to that, I did not put it all on the PowerPoint. I can share a screen that has it up in a little bit here, but um, let me share my screen. All right, so everybody see a PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yep.
All right,
Yes.
fantastic. All right, so let's get you guys over here. All right, so as this is where we've gone, this is where we've been, and tonight it's remembering God's faithfulness. All right, key verse for tonight is Deuteronomy 32, 3 to 4. I will proclaim the name of the Lord. Oh, praise the greatness of our God. He is the rock, his works are perfect, and all his ways are just. And then Deuteronomy 32, 45 to 47. Take heart. What? Take heart to all the
Trouble
words.
with the swiping.
Are you all right? Take heart, all the words I have solemnly declared to you this day. They are not just idle words for you, they are your life. All right, so we're winding down. You got to kind of picture it. You know, we're coming to the end of Deuteronomy. Remember, Deuteronomy is meant to be remembered and almost even read as a single, kind of sermon. It happens over the course of a single time rather than, the other works that happen over the course of longer periods of time. So, as we get started, let's kick it off. We're going to be talking about God's faithfulness. So, does anyone have any memories of God's faithfulness that's impacted your life? No, nobody.
Oh,
God hasn't been faithful to any of us. That's a shame.
no,
Oh,
no. I mean, he's faithful to us every day
right.
in all things. I
Okay. Well, hold on a second. Hit the wrong button. So but I guess as you think about that, yeah, I totally agree with you, Chris, that God is always faithful in all things. But what's kind of one of the challenge, with that?
I mean, the faithfulness, like Chris says, it's there all the time. It doesn't have to be huge things.
Right?
Um, and also God's answers to our prayers are not always what we expect.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's kind of like we talk about. Does anybody have, like, when you on Sunday morning, have anybody have any um,
Praises.
praises? Thank you. Um, and you can sit there and think, well, gee, I had heat on this week. I had food on the table, which are all absolutely blessings. And I think sometimes we think we need big things to be blessings. When, like
Mm-hmm.
Chris said, every day is a faithfulness from God.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other thoughts?
Well, he's brought Herman and I, or our family, through a lot of financial issues.
Mm-hmm.
God brought me through the issues I was having last summer with my former friend.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So tonight we're going to read chapter 32, verses 1 through 47. So it's a long read. But we can kind of, as you think about it, as you listen, we can kind of chunk them up a little bit into little packets. So verses 1 through 6 talks about the greatness and justice of God, and that's contrasted with Israel's unfaithfulness. No, verses 7 through 18 remembering God's care for Israel in the response of rebellion, verses 19 through 35. God's judgment and mercy on his people. And then verses 36 through 47, God's promise of deliverance and the exhortation to heed his words. All right, so I asked you to tee up your Bibles. I'm going to swing over and share this. Now, is everybody looking at a Bible verse?
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay, great. It's working. All right, so let's read together. So this is verse chapter 32, and it's the English Standard Version. Give ear, O heavens, and I will speak, and let the earth hear the words of my mouth. May my teaching drop as the rain, my speech distill as the dew, like gentle rain upon the tender grass, and like showers upon the herb. For I will proclaim the name of the Lord, ascribe greatness to our God. The rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are justice. A God of faithfulness and without iniquity, just and upright is he. They have dealt corruptly with him. They are no longer his children because they are blemished. They are a crooked and twisted generation. Do you thus repay the Lord, you foolish and senseless people? Is not he your father who created you, who made you and established you? Remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, and he will show you, your elders, and they will tell you. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted heritage. He found him in a desert land and in the howling waste of the wilderness. He encircled him, he cared for him. He kept him as the apple of his eye, like an eagle that stirs up its nest, that flutters over its young, spreading out its wings, catching them, bearing them on its pinions. The Lord alone guided him. No foreign God was with him. He made him ride on the high places of the land, and he ate the produce of the field. And he suckled him with honey out of the rock, and oil out of the flinty rock, curds from the herd, and milk from the flock, with fat of lambs, rams of Bashan, and goats, with the very finest of the wheat. And you drank foaming wine made from the blood of the grape. But Jeshurun grew fat and kicked. You grew fat, shout, and sleek. Then he forsook God who made him and scoffed at the rock of his salvation. They stirred him to jealousy with strange gods. With abominations, they provoked him to anger. They sacrificed to demons that were no gods, to gods they had never known, to new gods that had come recently, whom your fathers had never dreaded. You were unmindful of the rock that bore you, and you forgot the God who gave you birth. The Lord saw it and spurned them, because the provocation of his sons and his daughters. And he said, I will hide my face from them. I will see what their end will be, for they are a perverse generation, children in whom is no faithfulness. They have made me jealous with what is no God. They have provoked me to anger with their idols. So I'll make them jealous with those who are no people. I will provoke them to anger with a foolish nation. For a fire is kindled by my anger, and it burns to the depths of Sheol, devours the earth and its incense, and sets on fire the foundations of the mountains. And I will keep disasters upon them. I will spend my arrows on them. They shall be washed with hunger and devoured by plague and poisonous pestilence. I will send the teeth of beasts against them, with the venom of things that crawl in the dust. Outdoors the sword shall bereave, and indoors terror for young man and woman alike. The nursing child with the man of gray hairs. I would have said, I will cut them to pieces. I will wipe them from human memory, had I not feared provocation by the enemy, lest their adversaries should misunderstand, lest they should say, our hand is triumphant. It was not the Lord who did this at all. For they are a nation void of counsel, and there's no understanding in them. If they were wise, they would understand this. They would discern their latter end. How could one have chased 1,000 and two have put 10,000 to flight, unless the rock had sold them and the Lord had given them up? For the rock is not our rock. Our enemies are by themselves. For their vine comes from the vine of Sodom and from the fields of Gomorrah. Their grapes are grapes of poison. Their clusters are bitter. Their wine is the poison of serpents and the cruel venom of asps. Is not this laid up in store with me, sealed up in my treasures? Vengeance is mine and recompense for the time when their full foot shall slip, for the day of their calamity is at hand, and their doom comes swiftly. For the Lord will vindicate his people and have compassion on his servants. When he sees that their power is gone, and there is none remaining, bond or free, then he will say, where are the gods, the rock in which they took refuge? Who ate the fat of their sacrifices and drank the wine of their drink offering? Let them rise up and help you. Let them be your protection. See now that I, even I, am he, and there is no God beside me. I kill and I make alive. I wound and I heal. There is none that can deliver out of my hand. For I lift up my hand to the heaven and swear as I live, if I sharpen my flashing sword and my hand takes hold on judgment, I will take vengeance on my adversaries, and I will repay those who hate me. I will make my arrows drunk with blood, and my sword shall devour flesh, with the blood of the slain and the captives, from the long-haired heads of the enemy. Rejoice with him, O heavens, bow down to him, all gods, for he avenges the blood of his children and takes vengeance on his adversaries. He repays those who hate him and cleanses his people's lands. Moses came and recited all the words of the song in the hearing of the people, and he and Joshua the son of Nun. When Moses had finished speaking all these words to all Israel, he said to them, take to heart all the words by which I am warning you today, that you may command them to your children, that they may be careful to do all the words of this law. For this is no empty word for you, but your very life. And by this word you shall live long in the land that you're going over the Jordan to possess. All right. So pretty long reading, but as you think about it, what did you hear?
It was like an overview of what their ancestors and them have all been through.
Okay.
but yet God is still faithful. Um,
Well,
he's
what
warning
I
them. Go ahead.
there was a bit in the middle there that I was just trying to find it about how God gets angry and is gonna um could wipe them out completely, but then I, I think this is around verse 27. Um, it sounds like God does not want to do that because God doesn't want the enemy to take credit for the wiping out.
Hmm.
That's yeah.
So what do you think about that? It's verse that part is verse 27. I
Mhm.
had I not feared provocation by the enemy, lest their adversaries should misunderstand, lest they should say our hand is triumphant. It was not the Lord who did this all, or did all this. Sorry. So as you know, in some ways you have to think like a what's going on here. So you have to in some ways think like an ancient Israelite, right? And so if
Mhm.
you're thinking like an ancient Israelite, you know, everything that happens, okay, is is intricately connected to their gods.
Mhm.
Um, and not only is it intricately connected to their gods, there's kind of gods that kind of, you know, there's multiple gods. So, some gods are more powerful, if you will, than other gods. Um, and when warring factions get together, it's not only just human beings that are um, fighting. It's the gods are there as well. And so they ascribe a lot of things to God. Um, and so as part of that, when he's talking about them, uh, you know, him being misrepresented, it's not just being misrepresented by a group of people, but also being misrepresented by I'm going to call it a rival god in their eyes. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Anything else that kind of popped out at you?
So when he talks about all the disappointment in the people, that's the first group that did not go across into the promised land. Is that true?
Yeah, true. First generation.
Right. The first generation. So now he's talking to the second generation that
Right,
is going to cross.
right. But yeah, I think one of the things you could also do is, he's directly talking about that previous generation, but in some ways,
He's
it
talking to them.
he's talking about, you can even go back further in history. Because what's one thing that what's kind of one common theme that we kind of see, as we look back through history, even through the time of Adam and Eve,
They
People
get
are
pulled away from God and then
yeah.
they return.
right? They pull away from God and they return. So we what do we call that? We call that unfaithfulness, right?
Mhm.
And so, one of the historical threads that runs through scripture is the greatness and justice of God that is always present and always faithful, versus this idea of Israel, and they're consistently demonstrating their unfaithfulness.
Mhm.
So as you think about that, yeah, I think he's talking directly about the previous generation, but we don't need to stop there. Any other things that popped up at you as you listened?
It's just, I don't know if I want to use the word nice here. It's nice to see that God is really mad. And it's clear, like we've been doing all this reading and seeing how the Israelites have not listened. But then in this song, you really see how painful it is,
Mm-hmm.
that the people are not faithful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we sometimes probably don't appreciate that. All right. So, as you kind of look at this, it's called Moses' Song. And it's just a, very poetic way of, as Jeanette said, kind of given this kind of history of God's faithfulness and their unfaithfulness. And it's really designed as, a teaching for those that come next to remember and obey God's words. All right. So,
Okay.
why do you think why Moses begins a song by praising God's greatness and justice in verses 3 and 4? So if you think about 3 and 4, for I will proclaim the name of the Lord, ascribe greatness to our God. The rock, his work is perfect, for all his wages are just. A God of faithfulness and without iniquity, just and upright is he.
Well, Moses has been there since the beginning, and I
Yeah.
think he has seen. He has seen. Is that right? Um, the Israelites screw up, and he's been there from the beginning and seen God repeatedly um, coming back to them and helping them. So he knows what he's talking about, basically.
Okay.
It sort of justifies the the anger and negativity of verses that are going to follow.
Okay. Yeah.
He may be angry, he may be doing things to you going forward, but it's not without cause.
Mm. Yep. Yep. I think the go ahead. Chris, you gonna say something?
Well, I was just going to say, it's like, it's like he's worshiping God with what he says there. He's praising God. It's like a worship.
Okay. Certainly is.
He refers to the rock a couple times. Does that have significant meaning?
Uh the rock, so in verse 4, the rock, his
Yeah, and
work
then he says
is
it further
perfect.
on too.
Yeah. Um, so what do you think? It's
I don't
Well,
know.
I think he's referring to God as the rock of all. He's always there. He's always stable.
yeah, okay. So um so in some way, when he's using it's the rock. So in he's kind of um using that as sort of a kind of title, if you will. Think about, Jesus, when he's talking to spine upon this, what, rock.
Rock.
Okay, so
Mhm.
and Peter becomes the rock. And so if we think about, okay, it's like, you could use a substitution there. So you could say, Yahweh, his work is perfect, for all his ways are just. But they use the rock. And so whenever they were using kind of a word, because there's different words they could use for God, Yahweh, Elohim, um, Jehovah Jireh, all these kinds of things. So we have the rock. All right. And so if you look and as a title, what kind of image would come to mind?
Well, they used to build altars to God with rocks too.
Okay. Okay. Used to build altars.
There's other references in 15 verses 15, 18, 30, 31.
Yep. A
Mhm.
bunch of them. Yep.
I'm thinking of the kind of geography of that part of the world and topology and how rocks sometimes they're like huge
hmm
rocks, not stone, rock, like a big, a big
Mountain.
presence, something unmovable, something sturdy and, if we're talking about faithfulness, something steadfast.
Yep.
Isn't I don't know if it's the New Testament or the Old Testament where it mentions about the sand, building upon the sand or building upon a rock, and
Yep.
the rock is last, the sand gets washed away eventually.
hmm So part of part of this, when you talk about the rock like that, uh, it in some ways it's a hyperlink. Where do you think the hyperlink goes to?
Probably the Garden of Eden, but
Yeah, well,
Let's go back to the garden.
yeah, creation. And so, as God was creating, what happened?
separation of earth and sky.
Right. And so in some ways you have the earth that kind of juts up. We'll
Mm.
call it the land. So the rock, the land juts up and water comes back past it.
Mhm.
So you get this idea that you know, you have this kind of jutting up. Uh, and if you kind of do like a word search through the Old Testament, because that's one of the things that you can do to look at this. A lot of times when they talk about the rock, they're talking about like not just a rock, but sort of a rock structure like mountain. Okay, and what do we understand happens on mountains?
That's where God meets
God,
people.
Right,
yeah.
right. So
Mhm.
so that's places where God meets. So this the for them, if you're talking about the rock, his work is perfect. Where immediately would their mind go to?
When Moses was on the mountain.
Right,
Mount
it's
Sinai.
Mount Sinai. And so what is it? Mount Sinai. Okay, that's so it's talking about that God. So in some ways, it's not this person, but this God. Okay, the God who meets human beings. Okay, and what else do we come up with when we think about the rock? Okay. Um, a very uh, uh, what's the word?
Immovable.
Movable, yeah, kind of foundational. Immovable is a good word. Um, that sometimes juts out, creates a place of refuge. Okay, so that immovable, God is, it's another way of kind of giving um, sort of form and fashion and imagery to God.
I've never been to Egypt, and I'm just looking at pictures of Mount Sinai now, and it has no grass or anything on it. It looks like a huge rock,
Yep.
just a giant rock.
Mhm. Yeah, it's actually it's interesting how some of this kind of comes up because one of the things that I'm a Bible geek at heart. So I listen to a podcast every Monday morning. You've heard me refer to this before. It's called the Bible Project.
Mhm.
They do a lot of videos and teaching, but one of the things that they do is they podcast every Mondays. Like this last, they just finished today actually. Um, it's it was a podcast of about 6 or 7 weeks on um, the imagery of the mountain in the Bible,
Mm.
kind of tracing it, from creation through the Old Testament now up into the New Testament. Jesus, on the Mount of um, doing the Sermon on the Mount. The writer of Hebrews talking about a mountain. So, anytime you see the mountain, it's equal. They use rock a lot, like Sinai, because you see these kind of things kind of jutting up. So it's a way to kind of image God and image that the God that's kind of transcends the earth. Okay, but is also, in proximity to people as well. So as we look at that verse 3 and 4, again, we're talking about this rock. Why does Moses begin the song uh, by praising God's gratefulness and justice? Well,
It's
uh,
another reminder.
okay, it's a reminder. Okay. Um, But why begin the song there? Why not begin the song with, hey, you guys have been incredibly foolhardy and have messed up time and time and time again, and go through that whole litany and then end with, God's greatness and justice.
I guess one thing is that this whole song is sort of about, you know, turn back to God because God is faithful to you. And so, God, by doing that, that's exactly what Moses is doing there, is he's saying that he's giving God the credit. And that's one reason. Another reason is nobody wants to hear that. I mean, I think of a classroom of students that you get in there and you start scolding them, they'll be like, no, 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 I'm not listening to you, yelling at me. So
And it's one of the, I think it's you why are you yelling at me? But um that's probably all you would hear. Okay. If there was anything after that, you probably wouldn't hear it. And in some ways, does it provide a bit more um, uh, I, I don't want to use the word satisfaction, um, but maybe comfort, um, to know that, the starting point is not us, but the starting point is God
mhm,
and God's
mhm.
greatness, and then kind of moving out from there provides probably a lot more comfort. than starting with the other and working your way back. And I think that in some ways that's kind of related to the second question here. You know, how does remembering God's provision and care, so verses 7 and 14, inspire gratitude and obedience? Because what's the purpose of this song of Moses?
To get them to turn back to God.
Right.
Mhm.
Well, in some ways, do they need to turn back to God?
To stay on track.
Yeah, right. For this group of people, it's to stay on track and not act like their parents and grandparents. Nancy, you're going to say something?
No, I said like their predecessors.
Yes, like their predecessors.
Mhm.
Well, this is Moses' last chance to, because he dies right shortly after this. I mean,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
this is his last chance to, you know, get these guys to understand what's going on, and that God's on their side, and it's kind of hard for us to understand that, but yeah, this is his last chance to lay it out for them.
Yeah, just to give it a little perspective, if you kind of look at the chapters here. So you got this is chapter 32. Okay. The very next chapter, which is chapter 33, Moses gives his final blessing. And then the next chapter after that, which is very short, it's the death of Moses.
Mhm.
Yeah, so in some ways you could think about this song as his, kind of final last words. Maybe his, deathbed words of wisdom, to his family who, what is he trying to do? Inspire them to stay the course, inspire them, to stay on track, inspire them to follow God. Okay. So, that's kind of where we're at with this. And so, we need to, take time. And what I think the other thing that this does is in some ways it helps them to pause and to remember. I mean, you think about life for a minute. How often do we take time to reflect and to remember?
Not a whole lot, I would think.
No, we're kind of busy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes we'll take some time, maybe at the end of a year, to try to reflect on what happened last year and kind of look and maybe be inspired for the upcoming year. But that happens few and far between. And if we're always running Mach 10 and you never take time to reflect, what happens?
You never learn anything from the past.
You don't
And you
learn it.
burn out.
Okay, you burn out. You don't learn anything from the past.
You're bound to repeat the same mistakes.
Yes, you're bound to repeat the same mistakes. And so,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was kind of, as you were saying that, I was sort of thinking about this, thinking about Moses in his old age saying this stuff and thinking about how his experience has made him wise. And so he can look back on, he's had a consistent message all along about staying with God as God's people. And yet people didn't listen. And his frustration with that too. But that he can now say, look, this is all the stuff that happened. I've seen this, and I know what bad stuff can happen as a result of it. I mean, this is a completely different context, but just thinking about like, I've taught the same stuff for 23 years. And so as I go into a unit, I will say to students now, look, I know you might be thinking this thing, and many of you are going to make this mistake. So I'm warning you about this now because I see it time after time. And I think that it feels the same here, that experience that he has, he can carry into this last time that he's able to offer this to the folks.
I think that's spot on.
Mhm.
I think it's exactly because in some ways, it it is the same kind of context in the sense that, who is his Moses? He's leader, but he's leader, he's teacher, he's prophet, all of those kinds of things. And same kind of thing that you experience in your classroom, lots of wisdom to know where things. So, being a student of history kind of allows that. So, you have this idea, you have this understanding, and the hopes are that this is going to be inspiring enough so that, as Herman said, you don't repeat the same things. But we also know what's going to happen. We're talking about human beings here, right?
Mhm.
And so, as human beings, you know, what is Moses a realist here?
He's an idealist.
Yeah. I think in some ways an idealist, but also I think he, some of this stuff is wrapped up in a bit of realism, understanding that, okay, we are going to mess up.
Mhm.
Okay,
And
that it's kind of almost inevitable that we're going to mess up.
it's somewhere early on in either this I think it was Deuteronomy study, not the numbers study, that somebody here, maybe Jeanette, mentioned the book Joshua.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I feel like it was only a couple months ago, but anyhow, I've been reading that, and it struck me. I read the other day a passage in there that said something about how the Jewish people still are the chosen people of God, you know, that God doesn't unchoose them. And it's interesting because I guess as Christians, we feel like we are sort of now the in group, right? We have the news
That
on Jesus and all that stuff. But
they've been replaced is what.
yeah, I don't know, but that's not true, right? So it just left me thinking, so is God still faithful to the Israelites? And how does that show up today?
Yeah, that's interesting. What do you think?
I don't know. I've been thinking about it for 2 weeks. I'm not sure. Ever since I read that.
Well, they're a small nation, but they still survive today, and
Yeah.
they're withstanding their much larger enemies, and they're overpowering them. So he's still backing them up.
Hmm.
But are they, I don't know, are they still listening to Moses? Are they not listening to Moses? I don't know.
Are who listening to Moses?
The Israelites, like, following this directive in here. I don't
Hmm.
know.
What do other people think? Everybody's nice and quiet today.
Yeah. Well, don't they have the same opportunity that all of us have? I mean, I do think God blesses them, but they can be saved like us through Jesus Christ. I mean, they have that same opportunity.
Okay.
I'm surprised that some of them, especially like the Orthodox and the ultra Orthodox or whatever, still live so closely by the law. Um, they sort of like don't have, they have like almost like blinders on. They live in the world, but yet they still live so closely by the law. Um, I mean, that's just what I observe in this country. I don't know what it's like over in Israel. I'm sure there's Orthodox and there's more liberal ones over there too, but um, they seem to be more obsessed with the law than they are of anything else.
Well, so think about that for a minute,
My
Yeah,
why would you be obsessed with the law?
because they're trying to please God.
yeah, they're trying to live close, be closer to God. Yes,
Well,
I I get that.
so think about it. If you look at their sacred text, what's their sacred text?
The Torah.
The he
Sure.
the Hebrew Bible, the Hebrew Bible. Um, and so for them, the Hebrew Bible is their, ancient text. That's their text by which they, live and organize their faith. And so, you have that. And then you also have to think about their history a little bit. So, up until 70 AD, it wasn't just the law, it was the law and sacrifices. But in 70 AD, what happened? The
The
temple was
temple
Temple was
was
destroyed.
destroyed.
destroyed forever. And so now what do you do when your temple is destroyed? So you become hyper the synagogue becomes the central place of worship. The study and observance of the law becomes, the elevated thing in which you do. And so, it makes perfect sense that if you're a Jewish person, you're going to, study, learn, and follow the Hebrew Bible.
I was looking at the favored people through the ages, and back in the day with Moses, it was the Jewish people, and Deb said that Christians are maybe in some people's opinions moved into number one slot, number one favored status. But through the years, you got the favored Jews in the day, and then as time progresses, Jesus wasn't a Roman; he was Jew,
Mhm.
showing that they were still favored.
Mm-hmm.
And then what comes after that? I mean, through the years, I don't know my Jewish history, but um, they still survive as a nation today.
A Messianic Jew considers himself a completed Jew when he, of course, that they're not in the majority.
Mm-hmm.
So what's with my ignorance, what's the Messianic Jew versus a non?
Somebody who believes in that Jesus is his savior, that he was the Christ.
However, they continue to follow the law.
The law, yeah.
So
Well,
they're,
do they really follow the law? Messianic Jews? I thought they observed like Shabbat and all that, but
but what?
they believe,
Still go to
but they
synagogue and
believe
stuff.
Jesus is the Christ.
Right? Yeah, yeah. They believe that Jesus is the Christ, but does that supplant their observance of the law? No, they still observe the law. Now, are they do they kosher and all that stuff? They're probably more on the order of a um what Sue, help me out. not
Conservative.
bank, yeah,
Conservative.
yeah, reform conservative type of Jewish person. So they're certainly not orthodox in their practice, but they're still Jewish. They still, believe in those things. But it's a person who has come to understand that Jesus is the Messiah. And so, I think in some ways, how do you, so you get this idea of chosen, okay? And what does, so, as you think about this idea of chosenness and who's chosen, who is not chosen, and does God's chosenness kind of fall out of favor? Because they're the questions that we're asking, right?
Mhm.
And so, how do we think about that? Well, does God withdraw his favor?
No, never.
Okay.
Mhm.
So how, and so we have that, understanding that God does not withdraw his chosenness, his favor. And so how does that work? How does that play out? How do we understand that? Well, who's probably the most Jewish person that you would know?
Personally,
Yeah, personally.
the only Jewish person I know is my chiropractor.
Oh, I've worked with a lot of people who are Jewish, or my students are.
Mhm. I was kind of thinking about this guy. His name is Paul.
Oh.
So,
Trick question.
what's that?
I said that was a trick question.
So, well, it is, and it is, and it's like, so we think about Paul, what did Paul say about himself?
He didn't think he was good enough or something.
Well, he didn't think he was good enough, but in some ways, in essence, as he talks about himself, he talked about himself as a
Yeah.
Jew's Jew,
Jew,
right?
yeah.
A Jew's Jew that in every way, he was, head and shoulders above others in his practice of his Judaism, right?
Mhm.
Right.
And so, in some ways, so he is a Jewish person. Now, did Paul ever stop being Jewish?
No.
No, he didn't stop being Jewish. But what did he do?
Accepted Christ.
Accepted Christ. And so his understanding is that, they are the chosen people. But then he has this quandary. So, in his ministry, he's feeling compelled as a Jewish person to reach out to Gentiles, right? And so as part of that, you have to say, okay, what do you do with your Jewishness? What do you do with that other stuff? What do you do with these people who are not Jewish? And what did he come up with?
In the beginning of Ephesians, it says, "For he chose us in him before the creation of the world to be holy and blameless in his sight."
Mm-hmm.
And then it goes on, he predestined us to be adopted as his sons through Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm. So what word did you use?
A number of words.
Huh?
He chose us. He chose us.
Chose us, but so how did Paul look at that as, Christian folks? Are you? What are you? You're grafted in. You're
Mhm.
adopted.
Adopted as his sons through Jesus
Okay.
Christ.
So in some ways, it's not that chosenness of God has changed. Okay. The chosenness hasn't changed, but in some ways it still lingers on. But God has also then grafted those Christ followers that are Gentile into, they've been grafted in. Okay. But yeah, sometimes, in our hubris, um, we think that, Christianity in some way has supplanted or superseded, um, Judaism. Other thoughts?
Just that it's kind of a cool system, but it also is a little confusing because a cool system in that it makes it possible for anybody who accepts Christ to be grafted in.
Mhm.
And so that doesn't leave anybody behind. But then also there's a lot of, we did a lot of reading in Deuteronomy and stuff where the chosen people would come in and see an enemy and be assured that by God that they would defeat that enemy. So like who is the enemy then if everyone has the chance to accept Christ and become a part of this? It's
Yeah.
just confusing.
So yeah, it is. And but as you think about that, go in and defeat the enemy, um, what is the impetus for that? It's not just, hey, go, you know, defeat the enemy and take their stuff.
It was occupy the land intended for you.
Right. And what's the reason
God's
that,
faithfulness.
okay, but what's the reason God has this? Because we talked a little bit about it already. What's the big reason that God has this um, harsh determination with others?
Because
You
he
talking
knows that.
about? Go ahead.
Oh, I thought we kind of said we know when they go into the land, they're going to be challenged because there's going to be other gods, and
Mhm.
it's going to be hard for them.
Idolatry,
Yeah.
idolatry. And, it's the idolatry because, remember we had that conversation a couple of weeks ago. Um, you know, there you have the path before you. Are you going to choose life or are you going to choose death? And life comes by following the word of God. Death comes by ignoring the word of God and in some ways assimilating yourself into a culture that allows for idolatry.
So let me ask you this: if God's such a forgiving God, why wouldn't He forgive Moses and let him into the land? Why did He have him die before he could enter?
There's 120.
But you know what I'm saying? I mean,
Yeah, why was, yeah, yeah. I
he,
also
he's
thought
he's a
that.
forgiving God, and Moses was probably one of his most loyal,
I know.
believing servants. So why wouldn't he forgive him and let him in the land?
Was it because he was in that first generation?
No, I don't think so.
Might have been.
But he did what he was meant to do, and I guess like anybody, you know,
But
you do what you're meant to do, and when
yeah,
you're
but
done, you're done.
if you read on the next couple verses after 47, he says, I because you did me wrong, you get to see the land from afar, but you're not going to enter it.
Right, right.
Well, if even after he was done wrong, he was sorry, and God didn't really forgive him then.
Well, is that true?
I don't. That's from an outsider looking in.
That's the example that, I mean, that's the whole point. Moses is saying to the people, look, you have to accept, you have to be faithful to God. God will be faithful to you. And look, I wasn't, Moses is saying, and this is the consequence. So,
Mhm.
Yeah, verse 51. Because you broke faith.
yes, that's the point. He broke faith. And so God is saying you can't break faith. You have to stay faithful.
Yeah, but the other side of that same coin is one and done, basically. One and done versus forgiveness and move on together.
But if it's the one example that they need to like understand finally that this is the deal, you know?
What say you, teacher?
I'm just the guide. So I have a couple thoughts, and the one thought first is that um God's forgiveness is not predicated upon Moses going into the promised land. I believe that, Moses was a perfect person with uh, a heart that was bent towards God. Um, in some ways, he was an imperfect person, just like we all are. And because of that, he messes up. But I believe that despite our imperfections, God is faithful and God will um, forgive us. Now, with that said, I think, if as you look at that verse that you brought up, um, I think there's a couple important things here. Um, because you broke faith with me, but where did you break faith with me? In the
In the
midst
middle of the
of
people.
people of Israel. And so we have to think about, you know, who is Moses? And as the leader, um, in some ways, he's held to a higher standard. In some ways, uh, infidelity has higher stakes. Okay. And so I believe that in some ways God deals with that a bit harshly. And it says that in the New Testament, in the letters of Paul, that those that are teachers are held to a higher account than those who are not. And so as I look at that, um, I say that, okay, while it seems in my mind that does the punishment equal what he did, okay, because it seems like it was a minor kind of thing. But he was a leader. Um, he was responsible not just for himself, but responsible for a group of people. And as such, um, the stakes are higher. And the other thing too is, forgiveness does not always equal, getting what you want. That in some ways, when we mess up, it has consequences. And Moses is reaping the consequences. But also at the same time, I would draw your attention to chapter 34, which is the very last chapter. And it talks about the death of Moses. Then Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo to the top of Pisgah, which is opposite Jericho. And the Lord showed him all the land, Gilead as far as Dan, all Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah, as far as the western sea, the Negeb and the plain, that is the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees as far as Zor. And the Lord said to him, this is the land which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob. I will give it to your offspring. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not go there. In some ways, as I think about it, I see grace there
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that, Moses could have died. God could have allowed Moses to die before he got to see that. But in some ways, he got to see, his entire ministry, what he was called to do, lived out.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when my grandmother was dying, what she said to me tearfully was she was going to miss so much. There was so much stuff that she wanted to see in my life and my sister's life, and I was in college at the time, and it was just she just wanted to see it.
Mm-hmm.
She was just upset that she wasn't going to get to see it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for Moses to see what it was that was to come for the people was amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in some ways, we see it, it's like how much he missed, but in some ways we also see how much, how far he came. And it was a gift for God to take him up onto the mountain. Because again, where did Moses go to? He went up
Up the
a
mountain.
mountain. What happens at the mountain?
God
He's
meets.
Yeah.
So you meet God.
Yep. Yep. So in some ways, I think there was a lot of grace and mercy there. All right. Well, it's 8:15. I think we've come to the end of our time. Anybody have any last minute words of wisdom they want to share before we stop this one?
We're speaking about the Eagles. I may not come to church on next Sunday because I think I have to work Saturday night. But if the Eagles do win on Sunday, Jesse does have to wear an Eagles hat during the service.
I'll tell you what, Will. I won't wear a hat because it's too hot. I would be willing if they win, if someone would provide me, because I ain't going to buy one, a jersey, I will wear a jersey.
I'm sure
I
that
have
we'll
plenty of jerseys in my drawer in my bedroom.
I'm sure you do.
So he would have to preach in a jersey until the Super Bowl.
I would
You would have
preach
to
in.
preach in the jersey into the Super Bowl.
Okay.
And at the end of the service, we do the Eagles fight song.
That's fair.
Okay.
Oh wow. You're
Pushing
really
it.
tough, Will.
What's the other half? If they,
Wait a minute. If Washington wins, though, Will, what are you willing
yeah,
to give up?
that's what I was.
You're gonna have to wear the jersey from Washington.
Well, I don't have one. That's
Oh,
my
there-
thing. I don't have any of that stuff.
Oh, wait a minute. Do we still have this on recording? Oh, now we have
Yeah.
evidence.
Yes.
Well, we could make a W. Well, we won't worry about it because it's not going to happen. So.
Okay. Well, what we can talk about that other stuff if it truly comes to fruition.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe somebody will have to provide my favorite dessert or something.
There we go.
All right.
Jewish apple cake.
Okay.
All
Thank
right.
you. Jesse was very, your christening yesterday was very nice.